It starts with a sound that does not belong. Not the roar of flak bursting outside the fuselage. Not the rattle of enemy fire punching through aluminum. Not even the scream of a dive that pushes the airframe to its limits. This sound is quieter, subtler, and that is what makes it so much worse. It is the sound of an engine lying to you. The crew hears it first at 1,200 feet. A cough, a hesitation, like the engine is trying to clear its throat but cannot quite manage it. The pilot eases back on the throttle, just a fraction, and for a moment everything smooths out. The gauges settle, the vibration fades. The co-pilot exhales, and then it happens again. This time it is not a cough. It is a shudder that runs through the entire aircraft, like the plane just hit a pocket of air that should not exist. The temperature gauge climbs. Not fast, not enough to scream at you, just enough to whisper that something is very, very wrong. The flight engineer leans forward, eyes scanning the instruments the way you stare at a stranger holding a knife. Oil pressure, fuel flow, RPM, magnetos, everything reads normal. Everything except the one thing that matters most. The engine does not sound right. And here is the thing about World War II that nobody tells you. The thing that does not make it into the movies or the documentaries or the stories your grandfather told at Thanksgiving. In combat, you know what is trying to kill you. You see the enemy fighter on your six. You hear the flak bursting at your altitude. You feel the G-forces as you throw the aircraft into a turn that might snap the wings off, but at least you understand the threat. But this is different, because this crew just spent 2 hours flying through hostile airspace. They dodged fighters. They navigated through flak corridors that turned the sky into a minefield of shrapnel and fire. They did everything right. And now, on the way home, with friendly territory below them and the base less than 30 miles ahead, something is killing them that they cannot see, cannot shoot, cannot outmaneuver. The worst part? It started before they ever left the ground. Someone made a mistake. A routine mistake. A mistake so boring, so mundane, so utterly unremarkable that nobody would ever think to make a movie about it. Until that mistake turns a cockpit into a countdown timer. The pilot adjusts the mixture. The engineer checks the fuel selector. The co-pilot radios the tower, voice steady, professional, giving nothing away, because you do not panic. Not in the air. Not when panic is the one thing guaranteed to kill you faster than whatever is already going wrong. But inside that cockpit, every man is doing the same math. How much time do we have? How far can we stretch this? And what happens when the engine does not just cough anymore, but stops? This is World War II Uncovered. And before we go any further, let me tell you what this channel is about. We do not do the surface level stuff here. We do not retell the same battles you have seen 100 times. We go into the archives. We find the stories that got buried in logistics reports and maintenance logs and incident summaries that nobody ever read. The stories where the danger was not the enemy across the sky, but the mistake on the ground that nobody noticed until it was too late. If that is the kind of history you are here for, hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell, because these stories do not show up in your feed by accident. And trust me, you do not want to miss what comes next. Now, back to that cockpit. Because what the crew does not know yet, what they cannot possibly know, is that they are not alone. 3 other aircraft took off that morning from the same base, refueled from the same depot, loaded with the same fuel, and right now, all of them are feeling the same thing, that sound that does not belong. Here is the question nobody wanted to ask in 1944, and here is the question that still makes military historians uncomfortable today. What if it was not an accident? Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is going down some conspiracy rabbit hole, stay with me, because the official record on this incident is exactly 1 paragraph long. 1 paragraph to describe what almost killed an entire crew. And when you start pulling on that thread, when you actually look at what happened that morning at that airfield, things start to feel less like an accident and more like something else entirely. Something someone decided it was better not to talk about. Let me paint you a picture of how aviation fuel worked in World War II. You have got fuel being refined stateside or in Britain, loaded into drums or tanker ships, shipped across oceans where submarines are actively trying to sink you, offloaded at ports, trucked to forward airfields, stored in makeshift depots that sometimes are nothing more than barrels sitting in a field, and then pumped into aircraft by ground crews who have been awake for 72 hours straight. That fuel passes through maybe a dozen different hands before it ever reaches your aircraft. A dozen opportunities for something to go wrong. A dozen points where someone tired, or rushed, or undertrained, or just plain unlucky can make a mistake that will not show up until you are at altitude with your life depending on that engine keeping you in the sky. But here is where it gets interesting. The fuel depot that serviced this aircraft was not the primary depot for the base. It was Auxiliary Depot Number 7, auxiliary, which in military speak means backup, which in reality means newer, less established, probably staffed with whoever was available rather than whoever was qualified. Depot Number 7 had been operational for exactly 3 months when this incident happened. 3 months. In that time, it had already been flagged twice by inspectors for what the reports call, quote, procedural concerns, unquote, which is military speak, for they were doing something wrong, but not wrong enough to shut them down when you have got aircraft that need fuel and a war that does not stop just because your logistics are messy. Now, here is the part that should bother you. The inspection reports from Depot Number 7 for the week of this incident? Missing. Not lost, not destroyed in some fire or flood or bureaucratic shuffle. Just missing. The paperwork exists for the week before. The paperwork exists for the week after. But that specific 6-day window? Gone. And the commander of Depot Number 7, the guy responsible for making sure the right fuel goes into the right aircraft? He got transferred 2 weeks after this incident. Transferred and promoted, which, if you know anything about how the military works, is not what happens when you almost kill a crew through negligence. That is what happens when someone wants you somewhere else very quickly and wants to make it look like a reward rather than a removal. Maybe that is coincidence. Maybe those records really did just get lost in some archive reorganization 70 years ago. Maybe that commander really was just due for a promotion, and the timing was pure chance. Or maybe someone decided that the real story of what happened that morning was more dangerous than whatever was trying to shoot these planes out of the sky. Because this crew? They were not alone. Cross-reference the squadron records for that day, the ones that did not go missing, and you find something that should make your skin crawl. 3 other aircraft reported engine roughness during flight. 3. All 4 planes had taken off within 2 hours of each other. All 4 had been refueled between 0600 and 1200 hours. All 4 had been serviced by Depot Number 7. 4 aircraft, same fuel source, same time window, same symptoms. And exactly 1 official report filed. 1. Now you tell me, does that sound like an accident that someone investigated properly? Or does that sound like an accident that someone really wanted to sweep under the rug before anyone started asking uncomfortable questions about quality control or contractor oversight, or how many other aircraft might be flying on fuel that could kill them? There is a retired flight engineer who was interviewed about incidents like this back in the 90s. He would not go on record with his name, but he said something that has stuck with me. He said, quote, "We knew the fuel was questionable sometimes. You could smell it, you could see it. But what were we going to do? Ground the whole fleet? Tell the boys we could not fly the mission because logistics screwed up? So we flew, and we hoped. And most of the time we got lucky." End quote. Most of the time, but not always. And when you did not get lucky, when that fuel finally did what contaminated fuel does under load at altitude, well, that is when you found out whether your crew was good enough to diagnose the unfixable and survive it anyway. Which brings us back to that cockpit, back to that crew, back to that sound that will not stop, because they are about to figure out what is wrong. And when they do, when they finally understand what they are dealing with, they are going to realize something that will make every decision from that moment forward feel like choosing between 2 different ways to die. The problem is not something they can fix in the air. The problem is inside the fuel tank, and there is no way to change it. The pattern should have been obvious, but patterns only matter when someone is looking for them. And in the middle of a war, when aircraft are taking off and landing every hour, when maintenance crews are working around the clock, when the only thing that matters is keeping planes in the air and missions on schedule, a pattern can hide in plain sight for a dangerously long time. Let me take you to the Pacific Theater, 6 months earlier. Different ocean, different enemy, same problem. 2. B-24. Liberators go down within 3 days of each other. Both aircraft experience catastrophic engine failure during routine patrol missions. Both crews manage to ditch in the ocean. Most survive the ditching. The official reports list both incidents as mechanical failure, probable cause, engine malfunction due to prolonged operational stress. Pilot error gets mentioned. It always does. Easier to blame the guy who was not around to defend himself than to blame the system that sent him up there. But here is what the reports do not mention. Both aircraft had been serviced at the same fuel dump. Both had filed maintenance requests the week prior noting rough engine performance. Both requests had been marked as low priority, and both crews had complained to their squadron mates, off the record, that something felt wrong with the way their engines were running. 2 planes, 2 ditchings. Same fuel source. The maintenance officer who flagged this connection and requested an investigation into fuel quality, he got reassigned to a different base within the month. The investigation he requested never happened. Or if it did, the paperwork has never surfaced. Now jump to the Mediterranean. North Africa, 1943. A P-38 Lightning develops engine trouble 20 minutes into a combat patrol. The pilot manages to nurse it back to base. Lands hard but survives. The aircraft is inspected. Fuel contamination is discovered. Significant contamination. The kind that should have been caught during pre-flight checks. The official report blames enemy action. Claims that saboteurs may have accessed the fuel supply. It makes for a better story than admitting your fuel handling procedures are so chaotic that contaminated fuel made it all the way from storage to aircraft without anyone noticing. 3 different theaters, 3 different years, 3 incidents that all share the same fingerprints, but nobody connected them, because connecting them would mean admitting something that command did not want to admit. That the logistics network holding this entire war together was stretched so thin, so overworked, so utterly overwhelmed that mistakes were not just possible, they were inevitable. And some of those mistakes were killing people. Now, the numbers. And I want you to really hear this, because this is the part that should make you angry. Official World War II statistics break down deaths into 2 categories, combat and non-combat. Combat deaths get the attention. They get the monuments and the medals and the movies. Non-combat deaths get a footnote. Accidents, they call them. Training incidents. Operational losses. Non-combat deaths account for roughly 30% of total military deaths in World War II. 30%. Tens of thousands of men. And buried in that 30%, hidden in the categories labeled mechanical failure and operational accident and pilot error, are fuel-related incidents that never got properly investigated, never got properly documented, never got properly counted. The researcher at the Air Force Historical Research Agency, who spent years trying to track fuel-related incidents across all theaters. She compiled incident reports, cross-referenced maintenance logs, interviewed surviving veterans. Her estimate, and this is conservative, is that fuel contamination or fuel mismanagement may have contributed to between 5 and 8% of non-combat aviation losses. 5 to 8%. That is more than weather-related crashes. That is nearly as much as pure mechanical failure. And it is a number that nobody wanted to calculate while the war was happening, because calculating it would mean acknowledging it, and acknowledging it would mean fixing it, and fixing it would cost time and money and resources that everyone kept insisting needed to go somewhere else. So they did not calculate it, they did not track it. They just wrote accident on the form and moved on to the next mission. But the men who flew those missions, they knew. Maybe they did not know the statistics. Maybe they did not know about Depot Number 7, or the missing reports, or the pattern that nobody wanted to see. But they knew enough. They knew that sometimes you climbed into a cockpit and something felt off. The engine sounded different. The instruments read strange. And you had a choice. You could scrub the mission, report the issue, wait for maintenance to check it out. Or you could fly anyway, because the mission mattered, because your squadron was counting on you, because reporting problems too often got you labeled as someone who could not handle the pressure. So you flew, and you told yourself it was probably nothing, and most of the time, you were right, but not always. And when you were wrong, when that off feeling turned into rough running, turned into engine failure at altitude, you had to make decisions that no training manual prepared you for. Decisions based on incomplete information and contradictory symptoms, and the terrible knowledge that whatever was killing you had been loaded into your aircraft by your own side. That is the invisible war. The war fought in fuel depots and supply chains and logistics networks that never get mentioned in the history books. The war where the enemy was not across the battlefield but embedded in your own infrastructure, waiting for the moment when stress and fatigue and corner cutting would turn a routine procedure into a death sentence. And the worst part? The absolute worst part? It was completely preventable. Better training, better oversight, better testing procedures, slower operational tempo, so people were not making decisions after 3 days without sleep. Any one of those things might have caught the contaminated fuel before it ever reached an aircraft. But prevention costs time, and time was the one thing nobody thought they had. So instead, you get 4 aircraft taking off on the same morning from the same base with fuel from the same depot. 4 crews climbing into cockpits, running through pre-flight checks, trusting that the fuel in their tanks is what it is supposed to be. 4 crews who are about to learn that trust, in the middle of a war, is the most dangerous thing you can carry. Inside the cockpit, time starts behaving differently. Not slower, not faster, just different. Like every second is making a decision about whether it wants to let you live or not. The pilot, let us call him Lieutenant Morrison because that is close enough to the name in the records that are not missing, has been flying for 18 months. He has logged over 300 combat hours. He has flown through weather that would ground commercial aircraft today. He has brought damaged planes home on engines that were held together by hope and physics. He knows what a dying engine sounds like. And this is not it. This is something else. Something worse. Because a dying engine at least has the courtesy to die in a predictable way. It loses power gradually. The symptoms line up with the diagnosis. You know what you are dealing with. This engine is not dying. It is arguing. Morrison pulls back the throttle slightly, richens the mixture. The roughness smooths out for maybe 30 seconds. Then it comes back, but in a different register. Higher pitch now. The cylinder head temperature climbs, but not in the steady progression you would expect from overheating. It jumps, drops, jumps again. Co-pilot, a kid named Reeves, who still has not seen his 21st birthday, glances at Morrison. Does not say anything, does not have to. His eyes ask the question that neither of them wants to answer out loud. Are we going to make it back? The flight engineer, Sergeant Kowalski, is doing something that looks calm from the outside, but is actually controlled panic. He is cycling through every possible cause of rough engine operation that he can think of. Magnetos, fuel pump, carburetor ice, except they are not at the right altitude for that. Fouled spark plug, except the mag check was clean 10 minutes ago. Every diagnosis he tries does not quite fit the symptoms. It is like trying to solve a puzzle when someone has mixed pieces from 3 different boxes. Reeves finally breaks the silence. His voice is steady. That is training. But if you listen close, you can hear the edge underneath it. What if it is the fuel? Morrison does not answer immediately, because answering that question means accepting a reality that fundamentally changes everything they are about to do. If it is battle damage, you can compensate. If it is mechanical failure, you can troubleshoot. If it is weather, you can navigate around it. But if it is the fuel, if the problem is literally flowing through the engine with every combustion cycle, then there is no fix. There is no emergency procedure. There is only management. You are not flying an aircraft anymore. You are negotiating with a machine that might decide to quit on you at any moment for reasons you cannot control. Run it again, Morrison says. Not answering Reeves directly, but also absolutely answering him. Fuel pressure, fuel flow, tank selector. Kowalski already knows what he is going to find, but he checks anyway. Because in the air, you trust the instruments until you cannot, and even then you check twice. Pressure is normal, flow is normal. We are on the main tank, crossfeed is off, selector is positive. Normal. Everything is reading normal, except for the one thing that matters, which is that the engine sounds like it is trying to run on bad fuel, and bad fuel does not show up on any gauge in the cockpit. There is a moment here. And every pilot who has ever faced something like this knows this moment, where your brain wants to deny what is happening. It wants to find another explanation, any other explanation, because accepting that the fuel is bad means accepting that your own side put you in danger, and that psychological shift is harder than accepting enemy action. Enemy action you train for. Enemy action makes sense. But this is betrayal by bureaucracy, death by oversight. Getting killed by a mistake that happened on the ground while you were sleeping, made by someone whose name you will never know. Morrison makes a decision, not the big decision, not yet, but a decision that changes how they are going to fly for however long this engine keeps running. All right, new plan. We are treating this like we have limited power available. No unnecessary demands on the engine. Gentle control inputs. We are going to baby this thing all the way to wherever we can put it down. Base is 28 miles. Reeves says. He has already done the math. Everyone in the cockpit has already done the math. At current speed and current altitude, that is maybe 15 minutes of flying. 15 minutes where the engine has to keep cooperating. I know where base is, Morrison says. And then quieter, start looking for alternates. That is when it really hits them. When the situation graduates from problem to crisis. Because looking for alternates means you are no longer confident you will make it to where you are supposed to go. Kowalski unfolds the map, starts scanning the terrain between here and base. Fields, roads, anywhere you could theoretically put an aircraft down without killing everyone on board. The problem is that theoretically and actually are very different concepts when you are making the choice at 500 feet with an engine that might quit. And then the crew chief's voice comes through the intercom from the back of the aircraft. Martinez. He took shrapnel from a flak burst on a mission 3 days ago. Superficial wounds, the flight surgeon said. Cleared to fly. Everyone knows Martinez should probably be in a hospital bed, not strapped into the crew compartment of an aircraft with an engine that is auditioning for a role in a disaster. Everything okay up there? That is the question, is it not? Everything is not okay. Everything is very much not okay. But what do you say? How do you tell your crew that the ride home just became a gamble? Little rough running, Morrison says. Understatement of the year. Might need to set down somewhere other than base. Just precautionary. Precautionary. That word is doing a lot of work. Martinez does not respond immediately. He is calculating, just like everyone else. Calculating what precautionary landing means when you are injured and strapped into an aircraft that might have to put down hard. Copy that, Martinez finally says. I am good wherever we land. He is lying. Everyone knows he is lying. But it is the kind of lie you tell when the truth does not help anyone. Morrison adjusts course slightly, not toward base, toward a valley that showed up on Kowalski's map. Open terrain, fewer trees. The kind of place where if you have to put it down, you might walk away. The engine coughs again. Harder this time, the aircraft drops 50 feet before Morrison catches it. Gentle power increase. The engine responds, but reluctantly, like it is doing you a favor it might revoke at any second. Reeves is watching the altimeter like it is a countdown clock. Because it is. 3,200 feet. Every foot of altitude is potential distance. Potential options. But altitude only matters if the engine keeps giving you some kind of power. Even unreliable power. Even power that comes and goes like a bad radio signal. How far to the valley? Morrison asks. Kowalski measures with his thumb against the map scale. 12 miles. Maybe less. 12 miles. At 140 knots with a cooperative engine, that is 5 minutes. With this engine, with whatever is happening in the combustion chambers right now, who knows? Morrison does the math in his head. Best glide ratio, if the engine quits completely, is about 8 to 1. From 3,200 feet, they can glide maybe 4 miles, which means they need the engine to at least give them something for the first 8 miles. After that, they might be able to glide to the valley. But might is doing a lot of work there too. We are going for the valley, Morrison says. Not a discussion, not a vote, just a decision, made with incomplete information and no good options. Reeves nods. Kowalski folds the map. Martinez, in the back, tightens his straps. And the engine, oblivious to all of this human decision-making, continues its rough, uneven song, still running, still producing power, still lying about how much longer it plans to keep doing either of those things. Let me tell you how fuel becomes a weapon, not in the dramatic sense, not sabotage or enemy agents pouring sugar into gas tanks, nothing that clean or intentional. This is about the mundane logistics of keeping a war machine running when that machine spans 3 oceans and burns fuel faster than you can ship it. Start in Texas, 1943. A refinery produces aviation fuel to specification. 100 octane, the good stuff. The fuel that lets engines run at high compression ratios and produce the horsepower needed to lift bombers into the sky with enough bombs to level a city. That fuel gets loaded into railway tank cars, travels to a port, gets pumped into the cargo hold of a Liberty ship that will cross the Atlantic in a convoy, dodging U-boats the whole way. Takes maybe 3 weeks if the weather cooperates and the Germans do not sink you. The ship arrives. The fuel gets offloaded into storage tanks at a port facility. From there, it goes into tank trucks that drive it to forward airfields. At the airfield, it gets pumped into smaller storage tanks. Field tanks, the kind that sit out in the sun all day, heating and cooling with the temperature, condensation forming on the inside walls. Water. That is the invisible killer in fuel systems. Water that condenses inside tanks. water that sinks to the bottom because it is heavier than gasoline, water that gets sucked up by fuel pumps when the tank runs low and gets delivered straight into carburetors that were never designed to handle it. But water is just one problem. Here is another. Got multiple fuel types in the same theater. 87 octane for trainers, 91 octane for some fighters, 100 octane for high-performance aircraft, 130 octane for the really thirsty engines. Different fuels, different additives, different performance characteristics, and in a perfect world, they never mix. In a perfect world, every fuel type has its own storage tank, its own pump, its own dedicated hose, and everyone involved knows exactly which fuel goes into which aircraft. But this is not a perfect world. This is a forward airfield in the middle of a war where aircraft are landing and taking off every hour, and maintenance crews have been awake for longer than is safe, and the pressure to keep planes flying overrides every other consideration. So you get shortcuts. You get contamination. You get situations where someone uses the same hose for two different fuel types because washing it out properly takes 10 minutes and they do not have 10 minutes. You get fuel sitting in field tanks for weeks, accumulating sediment, growing microbes that actually eat petroleum and produce waste products that gum up fuel filters. You get civilian contractors hired to handle fuel operations because military personnel are needed elsewhere, and those contractors are working with equipment they barely understand, following procedures that were written for ideal conditions that have not existed at this airfield since it opened. And you get Depot Number 7, 3 months old, established in a hurry because the primary depot could not keep up with demand, staffed by whoever was available, supplied by whoever could deliver, operating under procedures that existed on paper but got simplified in practice because, again, time was the enemy as much as the actual enemy. The inspection reports that still exist, the ones from before the week that went missing, paint a picture that should make you uncomfortable. Quote, fuel storage tanks lack proper sediment drains. Recommendation: install drain valves on all tanks. Status: deferred. Pending parts availability. Quote, fuel handling personnel demonstrate inconsistent adherence to cross-contamination prevention protocols. Recommendation: mandatory retraining. Status: scheduled but not yet completed due to operational tempo. Quote, quality testing procedures not being performed at required intervals. Recommendation: assign dedicated quality control officer. Status: personnel request pending. 3 separate problems, 3 separate recommendations, 3 separate deferrals. And those are just the problems someone bothered to write down. Now, the fuel that went into Morrison's aircraft came from Depot Number 7 on the morning of this flight. We know that from the records that did survive. What we do not know, what the missing reports would have told us, is what condition that fuel was in. Was it contaminated with water? Probably, to some degree. Field tanks always accumulate some water. Was it the wrong octane rating? Possible. Mix-ups happen more often than anyone wanted to admit. Was it contaminated with sediment or microbial growth? Also possible, especially if quality testing was not being done regularly. Or was it some combination of all 3? A perfect storm of small problems that individually might not have been catastrophic, but together created fuel that would run in an engine just well enough to get you airborne, but not well enough to keep you alive? Here is what a flight engineer told researchers decades later, and I am paraphrasing because he did not want his name used. He said the ground crews developed an informal test. When they fueled an aircraft, they would save a small sample in a glass jar, hold it up to the light. Good fuel was clear, maybe slightly amber. You could see through it. Bad fuel? Bad fuel was cloudy. Sometimes you could see particles floating in it. Sometimes you could see a layer of water separated out at the bottom. And when they saw bad fuel, they would report it. And sometimes someone would come out and drain the tank and refuel from a different source. But sometimes, especially when the operational tempo was high and the mission was urgent, they would get told to fly anyway. The fuel is good enough, they would be told. The engine will burn it. And technically, that was true. The engine would burn it. For a while. The contamination accumulated in the fuel system, until the water slugs hit the carburetor, until the wrong octane rating caused detonation that started damaging valves and pistons. The engine would burn it right up until it could not anymore. That is the fuel supply chain in World War II, not the sanitized version in the logistics manuals, the real version. The version where mistakes compound and oversight fails, and people make decisions based on what they think they can get away with, rather than what the procedures actually require. And 4 aircraft took off that morning with fuel from that system. 4 crews trusted that someone, somewhere in that chain from Texas to the flight line, had done their job correctly. That trust was misplaced. But they would not know that until the engine started arguing with them, until the symptoms stopped making sense, until they had to consider the possibility that the problem was not mechanical failure or combat damage or pilot error. The problem was that someone handed them a weapon disguised as fuel, and now they had to figure out how to survive it. 2,800 feet. That number matters more than any other number in Morrison's life right now. More than airspeed, more than distance to the valley, more than fuel quantity, which is almost funny when you think about it, because they have plenty of fuel, just not fuel that works. Altitude is potential. Altitude is options. Altitude is the currency you spend to buy distance when the engine quits, and Morrison is watching that currency drain away with every minute the engine continues its rough, uneven performance. They are descending, not dramatically, not in a way that civilian observers on the ground would notice, but 50 feet per minute adds up. In 10 minutes, that is 500 feet gone. 500 feet that Morrison cannot get back without asking the engine for climb power, and asking this engine for anything feels like negotiating with something that has already decided it does not owe you favors. Reeves is doing math on his knee pad, the kind of math you do when your life depends on the answer being workable. Current altitude, 2,800. Distance to valley, 9 miles. Best glide ratio, 8-to-1. That gives them, if the engine quits right now, about 3.5 miles of gliding distance, which means they need the engine to carry them at least 5.5 miles before they can afford for it to die completely. 5.5 miles. At 130 knots, because Morrison has slowed down, trying to reduce stress on the engine. That is 2.5 minutes of flight time where the engine has to keep producing some kind of power. Reeves does not like those numbers. You can see it in the way he is gripping the knee pad, the way his jaw is set. "We are not going to make it," he says quietly. Morrison does not answer immediately. He is listening to the engine. Really listening. The rough running has developed a pattern now. It smooths out for maybe 20 seconds, then coughs for 5, then smooths again, like it is cycling through phases. Good fuel hitting the cylinders, then bad fuel, then good again. Which means the contamination is not uniform. There are pockets of better fuel mixed with pockets of worse fuel. And that gives Morrison an idea that is either brilliant or suicidal, and he has about 30 seconds to decide which. "What if we are not supposed to make it to the valley?" Morrison says. Reeves looks at him like he just suggested they bail out and walk home. "What if we are thinking about this wrong?" Morrison continues. "We have been trying to stretch the glide, save altitude, maximize distance. But look at what is below us right now." Kowalski already has the map out. Farmland, some fields, looks open enough. How open? Kowalski squints out the window, matching terrain features to the map. Maybe half a mile of clear ground, trees on the east side, small creek on the west. That is enough. For what? Reeves asks, but he already knows. You can hear it in his voice. He knows what Morrison is suggesting, and he does not like it, but he also cannot argue with the math. We put it down here. Now, while we still have some control, while we still have altitude to set up an approach, we do not try to make it to the valley. We take the option that is right in front of us. A silence in the cockpit that feels like it weighs more than the aircraft. Because Morrison is not just suggesting they land early, he is suggesting they give up on reaching base, give up on landing at a prepared strip with emergency equipment and medical personnel and all the things that make a landing survivable when it goes wrong. He is suggesting they put this aircraft down in a farmer's field, with a rough-running engine that might quit during the approach, with an injured crew member in the back who might not survive a hard landing, with no guarantee that the field is actually as clear as it looks from altitude. Martinez cannot bail out, Kowalski says quietly, not with his injuries. And there it is, the thing nobody wanted to say out loud. If they push for the valley and the engine quits before they get there, they will have to bail out. Standard procedure, no choice. You do not ride a dead aircraft into the ground when you have parachutes. But Martinez cannot jump, which means if they bail out, Martinez dies. Simple as that. So, the choice is not really about fuel, or altitude, or distance. The choice is whether they are going to risk a controlled landing in marginal conditions, or risk an uncontrolled crash trying to reach better conditions. Reeves is still staring at the numbers on his knee pad like they might change if he looks hard enough. "What is the call?" he finally asks. And this is the moment that does not make it into the movies. This is not heroic. This is not brave. This is just math and ethics and the terrible awareness that whatever Morrison decides, he is betting everyone's life on it. Push for the valley, and they might make it. Or the engine might quit, and they might have to bail out, and Martinez definitely dies. Land here, and they might walk away. Or the field might be rougher than it looks, and they might cartwheel into those trees, and everyone dies. There is no good option. There is only less bad and more bad, and you have maybe 10 seconds to decide which is which before the decision gets made for you. Morrison looks out the window. The field is coming up on the left side, maybe 800 yards long. Hard to tell from this altitude. Could be enough. Could be too short. The engine coughs again. Longer this time. 3 seconds of rough running that feels like 3 hours. Then it smooths out. That decides it. "We are landing here," Morrison says. His voice is steady, not confident. "Just committed. Kowalski, prep for emergency landing. Reeves, radio our position. Tell them we are putting down in a field approximately 6 miles northeast of base. Tell them we will need medical evac for Martinez." "Copy," Reeves says. His hands move to the radio controls. Muscle memory taking over. Kowalski is already securing loose equipment, making sure everything that can move is tied down, because even a good landing in a field is going to be rough. And Martinez, in the back, listening to all of this through the intercom, speaks up one more time. "Appreciate it, Lieutenant." 2 words. That is all. But everyone in the cockpit knows what he means. He means, "Thank you for not leaving me. Thank you for risking a bad landing instead of guaranteeing my death." Morrison does not respond. Cannot respond. Because if he tries to talk right now, if he tries to acknowledge what Martinez just said, his voice might crack, and that is not what anyone needs to hear from the pilot right now. Instead, he banks the aircraft left. Gentle turn. No sudden movements. The engine protests slightly, but keeps running. They are committed now. Field landing. No going back. Either this works or it does not, and they are going to find out in about 90 seconds. Morrison starts running through the mental checklist. Airspeed, altitude, position relative to the field, wind direction, engine power available. That last one is the variable that scares him, because he does not know how much power he actually has. The engine is giving him something, but whether it will keep giving him something all the way to touchdown is a question he cannot answer. 1,700 feet now. The field is more visible. Morrison can see the details now. Furrows in the soil. Some kind of crop, maybe. Hard to tell. And trees. Definitely trees on the far end. Which means they need to touch down early in the field, get stopped before they run out of room. "Down," Morrison says. Reeves reaches for the landing gear lever. There is a mechanical thunk as the gear extends. 3 green lights indicate locked position. That is good. That is one thing working correctly. Morrison drops the nose slightly. 1,500 feet. Airspeed bleeding off to approach speed. Engine still running. Still rough. Still threatening to quit at any moment. The field is filling the windscreen now. Morrison can see individual features. A fence line. A ditch. Terrain that looks smooth from altitude, but definitely is not smooth up close. 1,000 feet. Kowalski braces himself. Reeves has one hand on the throttle, ready to shove it forward if Morrison needs power, knowing that asking this engine for power might be the thing that finally kills it. 800 feet. Morrison can see the trees clearly now. Tall trees. The kind that will destroy an aircraft if you hit them at any speed above walking. The engine coughs. Hard. The aircraft drops. Morrison catches it with a gentle power increase, and the engine responds, barely, grudgingly. 500 feet. "Here we go," Morrison says. And the field rushes up to meet them. There is a sound an aircraft makes when it touches ground it was never designed to touch. Not the squeal of rubber on concrete, not the controlled thump of a carrier landing. This is metal meeting Earth at angles that engineers spent years trying to prevent. This is physics, asserting itself in ways that test every rivet, every weld, every structural member that holds aluminum in the shape of something that should only exist in the sky. Morrison feels it in his bones before he hears it. The main gear hits first, not a bounce, a slam. The kind of impact that compresses shock struts past their design limits and sends a shockwave through the airframe that you feel in your teeth. The aircraft wants to porpoise, nose up, but Morrison has the yoke forward, forcing the nose wheel down, because porpoising in a field is how you flip an aircraft end over end. The nose wheel hits. Another slam. The aircraft shudders. Everything not secured becomes a projectile. Kowalski's map flies forward, hits the instrument panel. Loose tools in the back clatter like someone dropped a toolbox downstairs. And the engine, as if personally offended by the landing, quits. Just stops. No warning cough. No final sputter. One moment it is running rough. The next moment it is silent except for the windmilling propeller. And that is a sound that makes every pilot's stomach drop, because a dead engine on rollout means no go-around, no second attempt, no options except to ride it out and hope. The aircraft is still moving, maybe 60 knots. Way too fast for this terrain. The ground is not smooth, not even close. There are furrows, ruts, places where rainwater collected and left soft spots that grab at the landing gear like hands trying to pull them sideways. Morrison stands on the brakes, not gradually, hard, immediately. Because those trees at the end of the field are not going to move, and neither is the aircraft unless he bleeds off every bit of speed right now. The brakes are not designed for this. They are designed for concrete runways and controlled deceleration. But Morrison is asking them to stop several tons of aircraft on dirt and grass and whatever else is under these wheels, and the brakes respond by heating up fast, smoke starting to pour from the wheel wells. 50 knots. The aircraft hits a rut. The right main gear drops into something, a furrow or a hole, and the whole aircraft lurches right. Morrison corrects with rudder, but the steering is marginal at best on this surface. The nose wheel is skidding more than rolling. 40 knots. Trees are getting bigger in the windscreen. Morrison can see individual branches now, can see where one tree has a trunk that angles out at the base, like it is waiting to catch a wing. Reeves has his hands braced against the instrument panel, not talking, not doing anything except waiting for whatever is about to happen. 30 knots. The aircraft is slowing but not fast enough. Morrison can do the math in his head without trying. Current speed, current deceleration rate, distance to trees. The numbers do not work. They are going to hit. Maybe not at 30 knots. Maybe they will scrub off another 10 or 15 knots before impact. They are going to hit, and hitting trees at any speed is not survivable in a way you want to think about. Morrison makes a decision that is either going to save them or kill them faster. He yanks the aircraft hard left. Not a gentle turn, a skid, using the last of their speed to swing the tail around, trying to get the aircraft perpendicular to the tree line, so if they hit with the side of the fuselage instead of head-on. The main gear screams. The tires are sliding now, not rolling. Rubber heating up, probably leaving marks in the dirt that will be visible from altitude. The aircraft rotates, nose swinging left, tail swinging right, momentum fighting Morrison's control inputs. 20 knots. 15. The aircraft is still turning, still sliding, now facing almost 90 degrees from where they were rolling. And then they stop. Not gradually, just stop. Like the Earth decided it had absorbed enough kinetic energy and was not interested in taking any more. For a moment, nobody moves. Nobody breathes. The silence is total, except for the sound of cooling metal and the slow tick of the propeller windmilling down to stillness. Morrison looks out the side window. The tree line is maybe 10 feet from the wingtip. 10 feet. He could reach out and touch those branches if the window opened. "Everyone okay?" he finally says. "Yeah," Reeves says. His voice sounds like it is coming from far away. Shock, probably. "Yeah, I am good." "Kowalski?" "I am here." Kowalski is already unstrapping, moving to check on Martinez. There is a long moment of silence from the back. Long enough that Morrison starts to unbuckle, starts to think about getting back there himself. Then Martinez's voice comes through, strained but present. "I am alive. Pretty sure I opened up a couple of those stitches, but I am alive." Morrison closes his eyes. Just for a second, lets himself feel the weight of what just happened. They were in the air with an engine that should have killed them, made a landing that should have killed them, and everyone is alive. Not uninjured, not comfortable, but alive. "Okay," Morrison says. "Okay, let us get out of this thing before something decides to catch fire." They evacuate the aircraft the way they trained. Quick but not panicked, Reeves gets the hatch open. Morrison helps Kowalski with Martinez, getting him out of the crew compartment and onto the ground where he can lie flat while they assess his injuries. Once everyone is clear, Morrison takes a moment to look at the aircraft. Really look at it. The landing gear is bent. Not failed, but definitely not straight anymore. The brakes are smoking, which probably means they are toast. The propeller has dirt in it from where it was still spinning when they hit the ground. The wings have stress wrinkles near the roots that were definitely not there this morning. But it is in one piece, mostly. And that is more than Morrison expected when they committed to this field. Reeves is on the radio portable unit, calling in their position, giving coordinates, requesting medical evac for Martinez. His voice is steady now, the shock wearing off, training taking over. Kowalski is with Martinez, checking vitals, keeping him stable, doing what he can with the first aid kit they pulled from the aircraft. And Morrison just stands there for a moment, looking at the field they just landed in, the trees they almost hit, the aircraft that almost killed them. He is thinking about Depot Number 7, about fuel that should have been tested but was not, about procedures that should have been followed but were not, about the difference between an accident and negligence, and where the line is between the two. He is thinking about the other 3 aircraft that took off that morning, wondering if they are having the same problems, wondering if they made it back, wondering if their pilots are as lucky, or as good, or as willing to take the risk that Morrison just took. But mostly, he is thinking about Martinez, about the choice he made to land here instead of pushing for the valley, about how that choice saved Martinez's life but risked everyone else's. And he is wondering if he would make the same choice again. He does not know. Which bothers him more than the crash landing, more than the engine failure, more than any of it, because in the moment the decision felt obvious. Now, standing here in a field 6 miles from base with a damaged aircraft and an injured crew member, he is not sure if he made the right call or if he just got lucky. Maybe there is no difference. Maybe in war, the right call is whatever keeps your people alive, and you sort out the ethics later. Or maybe that is just what you tell yourself when you do not want to think too hard about the decisions you make when everything is going wrong. Reeves walks over, radio in hand. Medical evac is inbound, 20 minutes. Morrison nods. Good, good. They stand there together, not talking, just existing in the aftermath. In the space between crisis and resolution, where you are still alive but not yet sure what that means. And somewhere, 6 miles away, someone at Depot Number 7 is probably going about their day, fueling other aircraft, making other decisions, creating other problems that other crews will discover at altitude when it is too late to do anything except survive. Or not. The report comes back 3 days later. Morrison is sitting in a debriefing room that smells like stale coffee and mildew when they hand it to him. Single sheet of paper, typed, official letterhead at the top. The kind of document that looks important but says almost nothing. He reads it twice. The second time because he cannot believe what he is reading. Or, more accurately, what he is not reading. Precautionary landing due to engine roughness during flight. Cause: fuel contamination from storage procedures at Auxiliary Depot 7. Depot commander has been advised. Procedures under review. Aircraft sustained minor damage. Crew uninjured except for pre-existing wounds to Sergeant Martinez. No further action required. That is it. 10 sentences, maybe 80 words total, to describe an incident that almost killed 4 men. Morrison looks up at the investigating officer across the table. Captain somebody. Morrison did not catch the name during introductions, and now it feels too late to ask. This is incomplete, Morrison says. The captain does not quite meet his eyes. The report contains all pertinent operational details, Lieutenant. It does not mention the other aircraft. What other aircraft? And there it is. The moment Morrison realizes this conversation is not what he thought it was. This is not an investigation. This is a cleanup. The other 3 aircraft that took off that morning, that reported rough engine performance, that were all fueled from the same depot. The captain adjusts some papers on the desk, still not making eye contact. I am not aware of any other incidents that day. They are in the squadron logs. Squadron logs often contain subjective observations that do not rise to the level of reportable incidents. Morrison feels something cold settle in his chest. Not anger, not quite, something closer to understanding. The kind of understanding that makes you realize the game you thought you were playing has completely different rules than you believed. So what you are telling me, Morrison says slowly, is that 4 aircraft had fuel-related issues from the same source on the same day, and the official record is going to reflect that it happened to exactly 1 aircraft, and that incident was minor. The official record reflects what can be substantiated through proper investigation channels, the captain says. He is reading from something now. Morrison can tell. This is scripted. Fuel contamination is not uncommon in high-tempo operations. Individual incidents are addressed through procedural review. Your crew performed admirably under difficult circumstances. The Air Force appreciates your service. That last part does not sound scripted. It sounds like a dismissal. Morrison stands up. Not because the meeting is over, because if he sits here any longer, he is going to say something that will end his career, and he is too tired and too angry to trust his judgment right now. Is that all, sir? The captain looks relieved. That is all, Lieutenant. Dismissed. Morrison walks out of the room with the report in his hand. One sheet of paper. Evidence that something happened, but not what happened. Not why. Not how close it came to being a very different conversation. He finds Reeves and Kowalski in the barracks. Shows them the report. Watches their faces go through the same progression his did. Confusion. Disbelief. Standing. They are burying it, Reeves says. Looks like. Why? That is the question, is it not? Why would the Air Force want to minimize an incident that could have killed multiple crews? Why would they reduce a systemic fuel quality problem to a single contamination event? Why would they make it disappear into bureaucratic language and procedural review? Kowalski has a theory. Because if they admit it is systemic, they have to fix it, and fixing it means grounding aircraft, shutting down depots, investigating supply chains. Maybe finding out that contractors cut corners or officers ignored reports, or the whole logistics system is more broken than anyone wants to admit. And that costs time, Morrison adds. Time we do not have because there is a war on and missions need to fly. So, they bury it, Reeves says. Write it off as an isolated incident. Tell everyone to review their procedures. Move on. They sit with that for a while. The three of them, not talking, just processing the gap between what happened and what the official record says happened. Finally, Morrison speaks. Martinez goes home next week. Medical discharge. Those shrapnel wounds did not heal right after the landing. He is done flying. That is not in the report either, Kowalski observes. No, it is not. Because if Martinez's injuries got worse because of the hard landing, and the hard landing happened because of fuel contamination, then someone might ask questions about liability, about whether the Air Force is responsible for injuries sustained during an incident caused by negligence, and those are expensive questions. The kind that lead to lawsuits and congressional inquiries and headlines that hurt morale. Much easier to say Martinez's injuries were pre-existing, which technically they were. Just not acknowledge that they got significantly worse, because Morrison had to put an aircraft down in a field at speeds that bent the landing gear and probably herniated a disc in Martinez's back. You going to push back on this? Reeves asks. Morrison looks at the report again. One sheet of paper, signed by people with more rank than him, filed in systems he does not have access to, part of a historical record that will outlive everyone in this room. Push back how, he says. Write a letter? File a complaint? Go to the press? Maybe. And then what? Best case, they investigate, find that the report is accurate as far as it goes, and I get a reputation as someone who does not understand operational realities. Worst case, they court-martial me for insubordination or unauthorized disclosure of classified information or some other charge they invent to make an example. So we just let them bury it. Morrison does not answer immediately, because Reeves is asking the question that matters, and Morrison does not have a good answer. They let them bury it. They have to. Because the alternative is throwing away their careers to fight a battle they cannot win against an institution that has already decided what the truth is going to be. But letting them bury it feels like betrayal. Betrayal of Martinez, who took injuries that will affect him for the rest of his life because of someone else's mistake. Betrayal of the other crews who are probably still flying on fuel from Depot Number 7, still trusting that someone checked it, still assuming that the procedures exist for a reason. Betrayal of the truth, which matters even when nobody wants to hear it. I'm going to write it down, Morrison says finally. Everything that happened, everything we saw, everything they are not putting in the official report. I am going to write it down and keep it. And maybe someday, when this war is over, and people start asking what really happened, someone will care. Kowalski nods slowly. Yeah, okay, that is something. It is not much, but it is not nothing either. It is resistance in the only form available to them. Private documentation of public lies. A record that might matter someday, even if it does not matter now. Morrison goes back to his bunk and finds a notebook, the kind with the sewn binding that will hold together better than a spiral. He opens it to the first page and starts writing. Date, time, aircraft number, crew names, what happened, how it felt, what the instruments said, what the engine sounded like, the decision to land, the field, the trees, aftermath, and what the official report did not say. He writes for an hour, maybe more, gets it all down while the memory is fresh, while he can still hear the engine coughing, while he can still feel the impact of the wheels hitting dirt. When he finishes, he closes the notebook and puts it in his footlocker, under his spare uniforms, where it will stay until this deployment is over, and then it will go home with him, and maybe someday someone will read it and understand what happened here. Or maybe not. Maybe it will just sit in a box in an attic somewhere, one man's account of an incident that the official history says was minor and routine. But he wrote it down. That matters, even if nobody reads it, even if it changes nothing. He wrote down what actually happened. And that is a kind of truth that bureaucracy cannot erase, even when it tries. Decades later, a researcher will find that notebook, will read Morrison's account, will cross-reference it with maintenance logs and squadron records and incident reports from other bases. We'll start to see the pattern that nobody wanted to see in 1944. We'll start to understand that fuel contamination was not an isolated problem. It was systemic, it was known, and it was buried, over and over, in reports that said minor and routine and no further action required. The researcher will publish a paper. It will not make headlines. It will not change policy, but it will be part of the historical record. Evidence that sometimes the official version of events is carefully constructed to avoid uncomfortable truths. That researcher will try to find Morrison, will learn that he passed away in 1998, never talked about the incident except in that one notebook, never filed complaints, never sought recognition, just flew his missions, kept his crew alive, and wrote down what happened when nobody was listening. That notebook is in the Air Force Historical Research Agency now, archived, cataloged, available to researchers who know to look for it. Most people do not know to look for it, but it is there. One man's account of the day the fuel almost killed him, and the system's account of why that day does not matter. Both versions exist. Both are true, in their way. The question is which one you believe. Here is what the history books will tell you about World War II. 50 million dead, cities leveled, empires redrawn, the Holocaust, Hiroshima, D-Day, Stalingrad, the big moments. The ones that changed everything, and they are not wrong. Those moments matter. They shape the world we live in today. But between those moments, in the gaps that do not make it into textbooks or documentaries or memorial speeches, there is another war, a quieter war, one that killed people just as dead, but did it so mundanely that nobody thought to record it properly. The war of logistics, of supply chains stretched past breaking, of decisions made by exhausted people working with inadequate resources under impossible pressure, of mistakes that compound until they become disasters, except disasters sounds too dramatic for what actually happened, which was just things falling apart slowly until someone died. Morrison's crew survived. That makes their story unusual. Most fuel contamination incidents did not end with everyone walking away. Most ended with aircraft going down in places where recovery was impossible. Crews listed as missing. Cause of loss, unknown. Or, if the cause was known, it got filed under mechanical failure or pilot error because those categories already existed and nobody wanted to create a new category called "we poisoned our own aircraft." The official statistics say 30% of World War II military deaths were non-combat. 30%. And buried in that 30%, hiding in categories like accident and operational loss and training incident, are all the deaths that happened because someone did not follow procedure, or could not follow procedure because the procedure assumed resources that did not exist, or followed procedure perfectly, but the procedure itself was inadequate for the reality on the ground. How many of those deaths were fuel-related? We will never know. Not precisely, because the data was not collected in a way that makes analysis possible. When researchers try to go back and reconstruct it, from maintenance logs and incident reports, they find gaps, missing pages, incomplete records, files that should exist but do not. Some of those gaps are innocent. Archives get messy, paper deteriorates, reorganizations lose things. But some of those gaps feel less innocent when you start noticing patterns. When you notice that the gaps often correspond to incidents that would have been embarrassing to explain. Incidents that would have required acknowledging systemic problems. Incidents that might have led to questions about who knew what and when they knew it. The researcher who found Morrison's notebook found other notebooks too, other crews, other incidents, other near misses that got filed as minor and routine. She found a pilot who wrote about taking off with fuel that smelled wrong, who reported it, who got told to fly anyway because the mission was urgent, who watched his wingman go down 10 minutes later, engine failure, cause unknown, who spent the rest of his life wondering if he could have prevented it by refusing to fly. If one pilot saying no would have mattered. She found a ground crew chief who kept a diary, who wrote about being ordered to service aircraft faster than safety protocols allowed, who wrote about cutting corners because there was no time to do it right, who wrote about the nightmares he had decades later, wondering how many people he killed by doing what he was told. She found records of court-martials, quiet ones, officers charged with negligence or dereliction of duty, cases that never made the newspapers. Convictions that resulted in transfers rather than prison time, because prison time would require public trials, and public trials would require explaining what happened, and explaining what happened might hurt morale or compromise security, or make people ask questions about who else knew and did. Nothing. The invisible war, fought in depots and maintenance hangars and fuel storage facilities, fought by people whose names you will never learn because they were not heroes, they were not villains. They were just people trying to do an impossible job with inadequate resources. And sometimes they failed, and sometimes that failure killed someone. And the institution, the massive machinery of military bureaucracy, absorbed those failures, processed them, filed them away, moved on. Because that is what institutions do. They survive, they adapt, they protect themselves. And protecting themselves sometimes means not looking too closely at uncomfortable truths. Not asking questions that might have answers you do not want to hear. Morrison never sought recognition for what happened that day, never gave interviews, never wrote a memoir, just kept that notebook, kept flying, kept doing his job. He survived the war, came home, became a crop duster, of all things. Spent the rest of his life flying low and slow over fields that probably looked a lot like the one he landed in when his engine quit. He died in '98. Heart attack. Quick. Peaceful. His family said. The researcher tried to interview his children, asked if he ever talked about the war. They said no, not really. He would mention it sometimes, casual references, but never details. Never stories. Never mentioned the day he almost died because someone put bad fuel in his aircraft. Maybe he forgot. Maybe it did not seem important after a while. Maybe when you survive something, when enough time passes, it just becomes another thing that happened, not worth dwelling on. Or maybe he knew that telling the story would not change anything, that the system that almost killed him was too big, too entrenched, too invested in its own version of events to care what one pilot remembered. But he wrote it down, and that matters. Because now we know. Now we have evidence. Now we can look at the official version and the personal version and understand that sometimes history is not what happened. History is what someone decided was worth recording. And sometimes the things worth recording are the things someone decided to bury. This is World War II Uncovered. This is the channel where we dig up those things, where we find the stories that got filed away, where we ask uncomfortable questions about comfortable narratives. Made it this far. If you stayed through a 45-minute story about fuel contamination and bureaucratic cover-ups and a landing that should not have worked but did, then you understand what this channel is about. We do not do heroic. We do not do simple. We do not do the war the way it gets sold to you in movies and textbooks. We do complicated. We do uncomfortable. We do the truth, as much as we can reconstruct it from fragments and notebooks and memories that nobody wanted to preserve. Next episode, we are looking at something even stranger. A pilot who flew a combat mission while injured. Not minor injuries, major injuries. The kind that should have grounded him. The kind that left him half blind and in pain, and making decisions that saved his entire crew specifically because he could not see well enough to follow standard procedure. Sometimes the thing that should kill you is the thing that saves you. And sometimes the rules that are supposed to keep you safe are the rules that get you killed. If you want that story, subscribe to World War II Uncovered. Turn on notifications, because these episodes do not follow a schedule. They follow the research. And research takes time. Check the description for sources. Morrison's notebook is publicly available at the Air Force Historical Research Agency. The researchers' paper on fuel contamination incidents is linked. All of it is real. All of it is documented. None of it is made up, which somehow makes it stranger than anything I could invent. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for caring about the stories that almost got erased. See you in the next one.